Hello, good evening, and welcome to, for the first time in what feels like ages, another episode of FPL Sunday with David Munday. As I said, it's been a very long time since we've done one of these, or at least it feels that way. We had an international break. We had an enforced break with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II as well, so that took out another week. I think I did one in between that and an international break, and I was supposed to do one last week, but had a bit of a bereavement in the family, so I had to take a bit of time off. So apologies for any inconvenience caused by some of those particular incidents, but we are back, and we are back at a rather awkward time. We always go live at 7 p.m, and Everton and Man United so rudely decided to pick the same time, which feels a bit annoying, really. There's so much effort goes into making sure all the important FPL streams are spaced out so nobody's treading on each other's toes, and in comes Everton and Man United with absolutely no concern for any of us. So thanks for that, Premier League, but I'm sure that we'll get by. What I will say is, if you can't watch that game and are being so kind as to watch me instead, then I will happily try and provide you with as many updates from that as possible, although I'm not watching it myself, so it's all going to come from social media. So yeah, that comes with that particular caveat. I always have to make sure that people are aware that whilst I'm streaming this, my kids are upstairs. It's just me and them in the house. So if at any point a child wanders in needing some emotional support, maybe some advice on their fantasy team, that just may happen, and there's nothing I can do about it. They are both asleep last time I checked, but, well, as many of you will know, sometimes your fantasy football team will wake you up in your sleep with a particularly dastardly nightmare, so that could entirely happen to my children. So, a nice warning there. If you have never seen the show before, I should always just clarify, if you've never seen the show before, you may well have never seen the show before because we haven't had an episode in what feels like weeks. It's all about capturing the aftermath of a Sunday afternoon, the emotions, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that happens in FPL over a weekend, and looking at some of the funny things, some of the not so funny things, going into some data from the games that have happened and preparing you for the new game week. And usually that's going to happen after the Sunday games are finished, but tonight we decided to go head to head with Everton versus Man United, which is a little bit different to usual, but for the most part we will be doing these after the games have finished. Now, before we do anything else, I do need to tell you to make sure that you have subscribed to Fantasy Football Scout, that you have hit the bell notification, and you like this video so that you can get more content like this, and you'll never miss any other videos either. And handy little reminder in the chat from Colm there to remind you of that. He said, don't forget to hit the like button, people, so I thought I'd jump in as well. I'll read out a couple of comments for people, initial reaction to the game week, as I was about to say, has it finished? But it hasn't yet, has it? We've got Danish has got 85 points. He's into the top 2K, so well done. Believe in Yourself had a bit of an existential crisis in the comments right near the beginning of this video being live, because he wasn't sure if where he was, I think it's midnight for him, was 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. Well, I can officially reveal to you there is no such thing as 12 a.m. and there is no such thing as 12 p.m. either, because there's 12 noon and there's 12 midnight. So that is the time that it is for you. And well played and fair play for listening to us at that particular time. Anyone else? We've got discussion, people already interested in Firmino or Darwin Núñez. And Bowen and Martinelli bailed out Murphy Medji with some points this weekend. So good news there for Murphy. Well, I promised that we talk about some of the talking points about the game week so far, some of the funny stuff. So that's where we're going to start, as ever, with what I've spotted on social media. Oh, in terms of things I've spotted, I did promise goals. Not on my stream, you're never going to see any goals here, but you're going to hear a description of one, because Everton have gone 1-0 up against Man United. It was Alex Iwobi. I don't know who the assister was yet, because I believe it's just gone in. So if there's any Anthony Gordon owners out there, there's fingers crossed for you. And if you've got a Man United defender, well, the clean sheet has been busted already. So apologies for that. Now, speaking of clean sheets, there was one clean sheet that did not get busted this weekend, and that was Chelsea. And of course, that was going to happen because Wolves have a very low XG this season. They've now gone they've got 3 goals in 9 games. So this was quite low-hanging fruit if you've got a Chelsea defender. Well, unless it's Reece James, who all of a sudden is now back into a rotation again because Graham Potter's arrived. And as some have said, Potter has brought the sorting hat to Chelsea. They stuck it on Reece James on Saturday morning, and he said Slytherin, effectively, or the bench, right? But he wasn't the only one. We had Sterling, Aubameyang, so many key Chelsea assets not in the team at all. And in the week that they actually kept a clean sheet, it's just classic FPL. And for the benefit of the podcast listeners, the tweets I've got on the screen, I've got one from our very own FPL Focal, who said, Wolves at home was the fixture. I was certain of a Chelsea clean sheet, so I got James and Fofana in advance. Well, that is a tweet that precedes unfortunate events, isn't it? And then the other tweet that we've got up, if you're fans of The American Office, we've got a conversation between Michael Scott and Pam. Michael's telling Pam that Chelsea won 3-0. Pam is very excited because she thinks James clean sheet. No. James goal and assist. No. And Michael Scott tells her that he got just 1 point. Well, that is FPL in a nutshell. Speaking of FPL in a nutshell, another storyline from the weekend is Dominic Solanke, who was, of course, at the centre of much debate, I think, for Gameweek 9, because that was the start of some decentish fixtures for Bournemouth. Didn't deliver. I sort of thought, well, that's nice. Maybe everybody taking chunks out of each other over a Bournemouth striker, that particular dynamic had gone away. But no, don't just never underestimate the FPL community's opportunity to have a fight about a player. And this week, well, I mean, the thing is actually fair play. I mean, I shouldn't really be knocking him, really, because Solanke got 8 points, which meant that he outperformed Kane on 7, Patson Daka on 6, Erling Haaland only got 6, so Solanke got more points than him. Tony got 5, Wilson got 5. So you've got the big name, expensive strikers, all fewer points than Solanke. The similarly priced, sort of like mid to budget level strikers also got fewer points than Solanke. And so, well, for the benefit of the podcast listeners, we here have accompanied with that particular layout of numbers, Jose Mourinho with his hands out like this at that infamous press conference where he's encouraging everybody to treat him with a little bit more respect. And so kind of making the point that maybe we should be treating Dominic Solanke with the same level of respect. So we'll see how that goes in weeks going forward. But this was a big week for Solanke owners. In terms of that goal for Everton, from what I can see, I think it's no assist because it's touched a Man United player. That's not completely confirmed. I'm just going on what's in the chat. I will try and get you confirmation of that in a minute. But in the meantime, what else have we been loving and laughing about this weekend? Oh, yes. The latest in the Mitrovic saga. As much as Reece James is a bit of a saga and Dominic Solanke has sort of become one over the last 2 weeks, Mitrovic has been, a saga for many, many years, scoring ridiculous numbers of goals in the Championship, coming up to the Premier League, getting priced at 6.5 million, getting bought by every fantasy manager in the first 2 or 3 weeks, getting maybe a couple of goals in the first 2 and then completely trailing off. Well, he managed to keep it up for a lot longer this season, as many of you will know, because I know a lot of you own him. And then, of course, he got that injury in the international break around the same time that loads of people wildcarded him in, even though he had an injury. And, well, what's happened is he's not played this particular game week. There was a lot of, I don't want to say debate, but speculation about whether or not that was the case. This morning on Twitter, there was a lot of people really concerned about it, including one person who went as far as to say that they'd had official confirmation that Mitrovic wouldn't start, then confirmed wasn't even on the bench, and after some rigorous cross-examination, basically when asked if this was certain or what his source was, he said, I have no idea, I just want to jinx it and change my fate. I have him in my starting 11. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey, but him not playing has actually then opened the door for a lot of people who have Andreas Pereira as their first sub to come in, and I think he's got 8 points. I could be wrong. Correct me if I've got that wrong. Alternatively, if you are someone who has Mitrovic and Pereira, and Mitrovic was you started him and he's injured, and Pereira was your first sub, and you've got the points, well, please let us know, because That's what we want. I mean, that's the stuff of not FPL dreams, but I mean that's a sign of a well-managed team where you've got a first sub as someone who's someone you trust to get points and deliver. So well played to people in that particular scenario. Well, actually, not on Pereira, but on Solanke. Nuclear Atoms said that his hero from the bench was Big Dom Solanke. So it can happen. It can happen where you actually get some positive bench action, unlike those who had Reece James and got 1 point and blocked who was going to come off your bench. Elsewhere this weekend, a lot of people have been waiting for Zaha to deliver, and it isn't really happening to quite the same extent that we were hoping. So I'm someone who has Zaha. I've had him for a few weeks now. And Sonaldo here with a tweet of a a large number of fish characters from SpongeBob SquarePants all lining up in a queue, waiting for Zaha to show up, and I completely agree on that particular one, because I'm really just waiting for that to be a decision that's paying off in double-figure hauls rather than drips and drabs. So we might talk about that a little bit later. Colm's confirming that Andreas actually got a 6-pointer, but I mean, even still, 6 points off the bench is very nice. Danish actually got Skamaka in for Mitrovic this week. I mean, well played. I'll be interested to see how that works out in the weeks to come. I know a lot of people were willing to risk Mitrovic, maybe bench him, with the view to have him beyond that. But you're already up on the deal, aren't you, Denise? You've got the points from Skamaka, so well played. Lewis Allen pointing out that he didn't have Mitrovic by the looks of it. He had Aubameyang who did not play. And Pereira came in as a first sub, so it wasn't just Mitrovic. There was a couple of other things out there. Tony D said 2 players at 1 point cameos for me: James and Perisic, and I had Andreas first sub. That's what I was talking about. There's people out there who could have got the points if it wasn't for Potter and the sorting hat. So, who'd play FPL, eh? And finally, a tweet that I just particularly enjoyed. I mean, not necessarily it's sad in a way, because we've all, had strong emotions in relation to Mo Salah in recent years. I mean, I think this weekend was the final confirmation that it's just not his season, especially for FPL. And here we have, for those of you who are listening on the podcast, a picture of a cow trapped in a swimming pool with the caption, "Blood is lost." And, the tweet caption is Mo Salah this season. And it's kind of hard to argue with that, really. But it does mean that we've all got a lot more money to spend, which does mean a lot more fantasy decisions to make. And in a way, that's quite fun sometimes. And someone who had all of that cash ready to spend in Gameweek 10 was actually me, because I finally wildcarded in a week that I was relatively confident was a good time to go. I know that I could have gone after Gameweek 12. I kind of didn't really like the idea of wildcarding with just like 3 weeks to go, because when you think about the fact that we're all basically just going to get unlimited transfers once the World Cup comes around, I kind of wanted to maximise how many weeks I could wildcard for, and I basically built my team with a view of that it wouldn't be too terrible in Game Week 12 without having to, because I don't want a free hit for it. So I tried to just sort of reduce my Arsenal and Man City selection of players, which ended up actually damaging me, because some of the best performing players in Game Week 10 were actually players from those teams outside of Haaland and Jesus. But I mean, I don't really necessarily regret the decision. I'm still happy with the decisions I made, but yeah, just not a particularly positive wildcard for me. Oh, we've got another goal at United. It looks like Anthony has equalised for the Red Devils with a Martial assist. Let us know if you've got any of these players, because I don't really feel like Everton United is a game that fantasy managers are that bothered by at the moment. So if you are, love to hear from you, and love to hear what thoughts went into you picking some differential players from these teams. But just finish on my wildcard. So as you can see from the red arrow just below me, I lost about 300,000 places before the United game and before Forest Villa on Monday night. Yeah, exactly, from Bernardo. No Cancelo and no Martinelli. Well, as I was already saying, I was quite happy to have the likes of Reece James, Trippier, Cresswell, Zaha, Maddison, Trossard, knowing that they would have a game in Game Week 12 when Arsenal and City don't. And I felt that they would do well enough in the games before that point in time that over the course of the 3 game weeks that it would largely keep me in decent stead. Unfortunately, that hasn't worked out at all, because as you can see, 1 point I think from Maddison, 2 from Trossard, 5 from Zaha. I got 7 from Bowen, or I think he may be in line for some bonus, so it might be slightly more. But yeah, I mean, I looked at that midfield before I hit the confirm button on my wildcard, and I was really quite excited about it, and it hasn't delivered. I mean, this will now sound like, the likely story. The 2 players that I was a bit nervous to not have for this wildcard was actually Foden and Sterling. Now, Foden I probably could have put in there and it not caused too much damage, but again, Game Week 12 just sort of spooked me a little bit. And with Sterling, just far too expensive. And, Nuclear Atom says, your FPL world got upside down by Cancelo and Martinelli. It absolutely did. And I'm really regretting not having them. I'm just hoping that this team can make some of those points back in Game Week 12. Because effectively, I know I keep banging on about Game Week 12, and I'm not really talking about the rest of the team. And actually, sorry, I'm being tremendously rude for the podcast listeners here. My wildcard team was Ward, Trippier, James, Cresswell, Bowen, Zaha, Maddison, Trossard, Jesus, Haaland, Kane, Gaeta, March, Gay, and Webster. But yeah, so game week 12, it does mean that all I need to do is bench Jesus and Haaland because they're not going anywhere. And then I'd bring in Gay and I think it is Solly March. Yeah, it's Gay and Solly March would come in. And then Webster would come in for Cresswell because Liverpool playing West Ham and I don't back them to keep a clean sheet in that. And so it means that I can use all three of my subs and feel it does mean currently I have a full 11 for that game with that's actually relatively strong. And I'm just hoping I make some of the points back in that game week. Although I wasn't expecting to come into Sunday evening 300k down on a wild card with just 50 points. But I'm still making progress over the last 2 weeks because in game week 9 I was 1.2 million and I managed to get 800k places back up to 400k off the back of Maddison and captaining Haaland. So I just try not to be too disappointed by it. That's what the advice I always give to other people. Wow, Nuclear Atoms this is all of a sudden become an interview between like a journalist and a member of the government. He said, how can you rely on Cresswell to compete against Cancelo? Well, I mean, it's a fair point. I probably can't. In real terms, it was Reece James who I felt was my expensive defender, and it's already last season all over again because I've never had anything out of Reece James other than benchings and then big hauls when I don't own him. So, I just felt like I needed a bit of pain in my life, so that's why I went for him. But that's enough about my wildcard. You don't want to see that. It's just let's get this filth off the screen before, as Tony says, someone tries to copy it. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into that discussion tonight. I'm already feeling too much pain from my team doing terrible for me to start jumping on the beef. I'll save that for other people. Right, so let's get cracking onto the usual stuff. I always, at this point in the show, give a big shout out to Neil and Tom Freeman at Fantasy Football Scouting in the editorial department. They do a fantastic job of watching all the games every week and picking out like really, really insightful bits of data. Way more stuff than you're going to get on Match of the Day. Way more stuff than you're going to get from, dare I even say it, from eye tests on Twitter. To be honest, I love social media sorry, let me rephrase that. I like it when social media is at its best. I'm not saying that social media is always great, but, I enjoy the discussion that takes place on social media. But when I'm making decisions about fantasy football, I don't really like to take people's opinion from that particular space. I like to look at data of my own. But there are some people I do trust with their eye test because they're quite informed and they watch basically every minute of football every season, and it is Neil and Tom. They are just fantastic fantasy writers. So I will just once again plug the scout notes that you should read every week, and I'm going to take you through some of the findings that they discovered about this weekend's football, and hopefully it will be useful for you guys moving forward. So we're going to start with Chelsea. We have to start with Chelsea. And it's Chelsea and Spurs actually is the first place we're starting because we've already talked about the rotation, and I imagine there'll be people out there wondering what that means going forward. And to reiterate the relevant newsworthy fantasy assets that didn't start in the Saturday 3 p.m s, we had Reece James didn't start, Raheem Sterling, Aubameyang, and Perisic in the Spurs game as well. And in a way, we shouldn't be too surprised with these two managers because Potter and Conte, and they both in the past have shown the fact that they like to rotate. But there's some interesting quotes that have come out of both managers that I think are worth people being aware of, because we are pushing into a part of the season where there's a little bit of fixture congestion, more so than before. And, the World Cup is coming up as well. So while Premier League managers maybe won't be... they're not going to be making decisions based on the World Cup, but they're going to feel a lot of pressure from their players, possibly, to get a bit of rest between now and then. So clearly it's on everyone's minds, and so it's worth having a look at. And there was one particular stat that I saw in one of the Scout Notes articles that took my eye, which about Perisic, is that he's now got 6 points over his last 5 appearances, and his average time played this season per game is 45.8 minutes, which is just insane. It's just really frustrating because he's a great player when he plays the whole game, but how do you know when he's going to play and get those points? And the quote from Conte, he says, in this moment, we have just started to play many games every 3 days. At this moment, we have 2 players that are front injured in Kulusevski and Mora. We know that on Wednesday, we will have another important game to try and go through to the Champions League. We have to try and find the best solution. So he's just talking about, just reiterating the fact that rotation is key for Spurs. And then in terms of Chelsea then, the interesting thing about Potter is that actually, whilst he has that reputation for rotating his players. He'd actually kind of shirked that off a little bit towards the end of his time at Brighton, but he has just like walked straight in the door at Chelsea and gone, you know what, the old Potter is back, and he just basically just hit the shuffle button on his team for the Wolves game, and like the game that we were almost excited for clean sheets. Now, the players that seem to have survived that are Kepa, who's actually 4.4 million now, which is, quite an exciting price, and Mason Mount at 7.6. They've started all 3 matches since the international break, so it's worth keeping an eye on them, I suppose, if you like Chelsea's fixtures. I mean, I was quite into Chelsea's fixtures, which is why I was considering a couple of their players on the wildcard, but whether or not you really feel comfortable going with those, are they going to get the points? Are they going to get the starts? It's hard to say. I'm now going to read out a big long quote from Graham Potter because this may just be useful for people moving forward if you're wondering what to do with people like Reece James. He said, "It's credit to the players because there's a good group here. I don't think we can succeed with just 11 players. I don't think it's right to just keep 11 going until they fall down and get injured or whatever, and then we play the next ones, as I don't think that's good for group dynamic. At the same time, I'm conscious that if we lose the game today, people would have been asking why I didn't play Aubameyang. That's just how it is. But as long as the reason's there, as long as I understand in my head why we've taken a decision, someone's got to take it. Today it's worked out well, and that's credit to the players because the group's really together and pushing for each other, and it's important that everybody knows that we can't just do it with 11. And just on that particular part of the quote, I mean, for me, that it's in a way, it's kind of annoying that Chelsea have won the game, right? Because he's been emboldened now, has Graham Potter, to rotate again because he's seen that his team can get heavily shuffled and go still win a game 3-0 and make it comfortable. I mean, I know it was only Wolves, but the players that came in will have taken a lot of confidence from that. So my personal view is that we're probably going to see this even more. Just to continue in the quote then, Potter's just concluding by saying, you have to take every situation on its own. If you're playing 3 games in a week in the Premier League, Champions League, and then the Premier League again, you've got to make a decision around fresh players who are determined and desperate to play. There's that aspect, and we've got a good group here. We've got a big squad with lots of competition, and you need the competition, people fighting for each other, supporting each other, wanting to play, but ready to help. And I think you saw that today. Kai Havertz scored, Christian Pulisic scored, Armando Broja scored, so that's pleasing. So, I mean, again, these players who are on the fringes are going to come in and play instead of the assets we've got. Not only have they played well, they've scored as well. Oh, yeah. Brian actually makes a great point here. Sounds like every other top 6 manager. He actually makes a fair point. I mean, in a way, there's nothing you can take from those quotes. But I think it's just worth putting them out to people that just it is clearly an issue that you're going to have to worry about. I've got some stats on some Chelsea players in a second, if you're prepared to risk some of the rotation. But just finishing on that subject, we talked about Mason Mount. I think this is the frustration, sometimes with Chelsea, is the fact that he is quite near the top of those players that are going to play quite regularly. But he hasn't really been delivering as a fantasy asset there this year because he basically almost doubled his points tally in that game with 2 assists. So, so clearly hasn't done that well so far. But, I mean, it is early days in the Potter regime, and if he's going to play more and he's going to play like he did against Wolves, then, well, maybe it could be an option. But I did promise some stats on some Chelsea players. Hopefully this doesn't sound too self-absorbed, but I just wanted to sort of highlight to a few people why I had been minorly excited about maybe getting Sterling on my wildcard and then, ended up in a situation where actually not getting improved to be the right decision because he didn't play. But, there's still some great stats rolling around. And someone's just asked me about Aubameyang as well. Well, anyone who's listened to or watched Fantasy Football Scout videos over a number of years will know I'm not a massive fan of Aubameyang, which I'll get to in a minute. But Chelsea assets then, if we're looking at the players in the last 4 matches who have had the most shots on goal that are on target, it is Sterling. He's top with 6. He's sort of competing with Havertz for the chief goal threat because he's had 8 shots in the box to Havertz's 9. 8 shots in total to Havertz's 9, 7 shots in the box to Havertz's 8. But Sterling's had the bigger chances, 4 big chances and just 2 for Havertz. And so just looking at the assist potential, Mount is actually top with 9 created chances. So I mean that is looking quite positive, and so maybe that means he is going to go on and do well in the next couple of weeks. But obviously, thus far into the season, he hadn't done as well as maybe those stats would suggest. But Sterling's still also showing assist potential as well, with 6 created chances, 2 of them big, which just brings us all the way down to the expected goal involvement for Chelsea players, and it is Sterling is top over the last 4 matches with an expected goal involvement of 2.78. So if you are looking for differentials and you've got money to spare because you've now got a situation where you don't own Salah anymore, well, Sterling potentially an option. And I've been asked about Aubameyang. I've been asked about who's nailed in the attack. Well, I mean, the thing is, if we're talking about, can we second guess Potter? Sterling and Aubameyang have had their rest now. That is largely a tried and tested kind of response to, benchings in FPL, in that, clearly Aubameyang and Sterling are going to be key attacking players this year. And so Potter is going to want to use them more often than not. And so if they've had their rest against one of the, weaker teams, he's got that out of the way. Maybe they're going to play more moving forward. On Aubameyang, though, because I do like Sterling and his numbers are quite good. And we should just point out, by the way, that Reece James is, bubbling around in some decent areas in these particular tables. And so there's no way that Reece James is going to play. He's going to play more games than he's not going to play. So, again, same rule applies. He's had his rest now, so I'm less worried for next week. But on Aubameyang, I've never really liked him as a fantasy asset because when he was at Arsenal anyway, he was the sort of player that wouldn't shoot very often. And so he was a player whose shot on target to shot ratio was actually quite high, because quite often he would have a shot, it would be on target, but he wasn't like a Salah or like Haaland is now, where he was a player who would just constantly pepper the goal with 4 or 5 shots a game. It would be like 1 in one game, 2 in the next one. And I just don't like players like that. It's just a bit, the stats there are just too anemic for me to be like, oh, this is a guy that's going to score every week, because he's just not shooting enough. And I haven't seen enough of him at Chelsea yet to suggest that he is anything different yet. I mean, he might be, but it's too early days. And when you consider that, my front three is Kane, Jesus and Haaland, and it has actually been since the start of the season. That front three has survived a wildcard. I don't think he competes with any of them. The stats that they're showing are just so much more reliable. So, forward slots come at a premium these days. I'm not going to, no offence to you, Pierre-Emerick, I'm not going to waste one of those on you. I do apologise. Although, actually, speaking of Kane, let's move on to him, because he is a bit of a talking point going into game week 11. Because, of course, he came off injured. So, maybe there is a slot opening up for me if we find out more information on Kane ahead of game week 11 and it's not looking good. So he came off, annoyingly continuing to prove to people that he is a good asset to own. He's kept up his 7 points per match average by scoring against Brighton. But yeah, came off. And these are the quotes from Conte. And whilst I completely take the point that the Conte quotes and the Potter quotes in the previous section were very copy-paste additions that you would expect from any manager, these quotes from Conte are a lot more useful. So he said, it's just a knock, I think. He's obviously gone full power for the shot there, and I've just managed to get in front of him. Sorry, these aren't from Conte. This is from Harry Kane. Do forgive me, which is why it's more forthcoming, because players are just slightly less media trained than managers. So it's just a knock, I think. He's obviously gone full power for the shot there, and I've just managed to get in front of him. A sore one, but they're definitely worth it when you win the game for sure. I'm feeling good. A lot of games coming thick and fast. We've got the Champions League again in midweek. We've just got to recover well, and the whole squad's got to be ready to play and just keep battling out the games. So sorry, that is from Kane, not from Conte. And the thing with Kane is that when he is fit, he does play. Like, he doesn't normally get rotated a lot, and I'm yet to really see Conte rotate him that much. And Kane also is one of those players that probably isn't going to be itching for benchings in the lead up to the World Cup, because again, this man often plays when he probably shouldn't. So I'm mildly hopeful. But the handy thing about a midweek game is it's another opportunity for us to hear from the manager closer to the game that we care about as FPL managers. I'm sure as Champions League fantasy will be interested as well. So yes, there is that particular information on Harry Kane. Ronaldo has come on for United, I believe, an injury to Martial. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes the game. Now, let's finish with Chelsea and Spurs, and let's move to Man City, who have just, wow. I could just say nothing in this section, and you'd all just be like, yeah, fair enough. But I am going to go into a little bit more detail. And, well, obviously, I'm one of those idiots out there who doesn't have Cancelo. So, maybe I need to have a look at this myself so I can sort out the massive issues in my team. So, I've split this into two little subsections. And we're going to firstly talk about defence and Cancelo, and something that's particularly exciting for him potentially moving forward from this point. Obviously, he's got the big hole in this game, but we know he's someone who's capable of points. We know he's someone who usually survives Pep Roulette. And there have been a couple of things that would suggest that Pep Roulette is going to be even less damaging to him in the weeks moving forward, because we've got this injury to Kyle Walker, which means that now you've got left back and right back positions that Cancelo could fill. And historically, I think that he has actually done better on the right. He didn't play on the right against Southampton, but what we saw was the way that the other members of the back line were lined up, with Akanji and Ake, was that effectively we ended up in a situation where City were playing with 3 defenders across the back, which meant that Cancelo could push forward. And so what I've got on the screen for the benefit of the podcast listeners is an average position map for Gameweek 10 for Man City with Cancelo highlighted. And to give you an appreciation of where he is in relation to everybody else, we've got Foden, we've got De Bruyne, and we've got Haaland, and Mahrez in a kind of front 4 whose average position is sort of halfway between the halfway line and the penalty box, which is relatively advanced. I mean, it doesn't sound it when you think about it. They spend a lot of time in the box, but they'll have obviously spent some time in the midfield and the defence as well. So in terms of that position, that's quite far advanced. The only player who is just behind that bank of 4 attackers is Cancelo on the left, who effectively is not that far behind Foden on the left as well. So he played really far advanced because of the way that City set up with their back 3 effectively, and then 2 of the holding midfield players. And if Kyle Walker had been in the team, would he have played necessarily as deep as that? Would he have maybe provided a bit more overlap? We know he can play on the right hand side of a back 3, but it is just a bit of a shift from what we've seen before. And of course, that increased remit to go and do some attacking. It meant that he ended up registering 10 penalty box touches, which for him this season is actually a lot. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't have him on my wildcard was that his stats thus far hadn't really been that. They hadn't been that exciting. I was looking at how his nuclear atoms at me again. This is worrying stuff for you, David. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You are right. But they blank in game week 12. Hopefully that's why I get my points back. But yeah, certainly moving forward, especially City's fixtures after the blank as well, are very exciting as well. I think there just has been this shift that I perhaps just should have maybe identified or anticipated, because, as I said, Cancelo's stats, they didn't really set the world on fire. In terms of comparisons to some other defenders, in terms of, how often he was in that penalty box area, how often he was shooting and creating chances. They were a little bit below what we saw last season, so I thought I could get away with it. But then things have changed. He's played really far advanced. He's got a mega haul when I don't own him. Really frustrating. But all of the sort of conditions around Cancelo look well, in this game, at least, it's given him the conditions to do particularly well, and could do well moving forward. And yes, Nuclear Atoms reminded me that in game week 12, your Cresswell faces Liverpool. He's made a good point. That's when I'm bringing Adam Webster in, so I'm sure I'll be fine. Right, attackers then, before we get too bogged down in how terrible my wildcard was. And we can't really look any further than Foden, really, who, I mean, wow, what a season he's having. He has kept up his ever-present starting record, and his, I think, is he on 5 goals? He's on 6 goals and 3 assists, so he's got a total of 9 attacking returns in the first 10 game weeks. And the thing is, I think the key thing here for Foden is the fact that he isn't completing games for Man City, which sounds a bit of an irony in a way, but the fact that he's getting brought off when City are comfortable shows you everything you need to know about his role, in that he's just so important. He is now a regular starter for Guardiola, so if he can blow a team away in the first hour, get him off after 56 minutes, you're only missing out on an extra 2 points as a Foden owner if he's got those returns, and another haul for him. It's worth pointing out that Foden went on a similar unbroken run of league starts in the second half of last season before being rested around the Champions League quarterfinals and the semi-finals, but that obviously is less of a concern but now, because they're basically kind of all but qualified for the next round anyway. So that's worth throwing in there. But a couple of decent stats around him. And if you're still nervous about not owning him, and one of those people is me, and I could have owned him on my wild card, and I decided to go for James Maddison because I'm a complete mug. He currently is top among all FPL midfielders for non-penalty XG across the season. For expected goal involvement, so again, for the benefit of the podcast listeners, I've got a table up here of the top, I think it is 10 midfield players for expected goal involvement across the course of the whole season. And De Bruyne is top with 5.93. But in second place is Foden with 4.96. He is overperforming against it, which was one thing that I was a bit, again, the benefit of hindsight is wonderful, but when I was making my wildcard decisions, I just looked at that XG overachievement, because it was in a similar place before game week 10, and thought, well, maybe it will regress at some point. Although, of course, it would then regress to still being the second best in the league. So, as I said, I am an idiot. But, and I was, Again, casually worried about rotation when it would appear I shouldn't have been. But the thing about Foden is, that, I mean, clearly, like De Bruyne, it doesn't really matter what your XG is, because I always say, basically, XG, you always need to be very situational about how you interpret the data, and especially when it comes to over and underachievement. You look at De Bruyne's stats every year, and there's a massive overachievement against his expected goal involvement. Well, of course there is, because he's a world-class player. The whole point of XG is it rates, expected assists, it rates expected goals, and only the best players can consistently score goals that other people wouldn't normally. And so a massive overachievement from De Bruyne makes complete sense. The passes that he plays from just ridiculous areas of the field, how he's able to get it from point A to point B and put it on a plate for someone. The XA sometimes is like 0.02, and then it's still an assist because he's put it on a plate for a highly prolific player. That's De Bruyne. Well, I mean, to be honest, on the basis of the season we're seeing so far, and combine it with the eye test of the fact that we can all see that Foden is a quality player, it's just worth pointing out that, that XG overachievement actually really probably is way less of a concern than it needs to be. The players who, if a player is underperforming against their XG, if it's over a short period of time, maybe that means that it will regress and they'll do much better. And then just to sort of flip it compared to the world-class players, you get some players who will just regularly underperform against their XG. And one of my most memorable one of those has got to be David McGoldrick at Sheffield United, who would just regularly get big chances and not put them away. So he just constantly underachieved against XG. Nathan Redmond did the same, and both of those players were long-term residents. They were basically mortgage account holders on the goals imminent table. Players that are shooting a lot, should be scoring, and they're not. So that's the other end of the scale. Foden and De Bruyne are the top end of it. So I'm going to move on now to our final of the three. I've got 3 games that I wanted to go into some decent focus on, and we have to talk about Newcastle. Now, I'm going to do another public apology, and no, it's not another one about my wildcard, and no, it's not another one about the name of this particular show being, a bit of a self-absorbed rhyming slang, although I will continue to insist it was as they came up with the title. No, this apology goes out to Eddie Howe, because in my sort of year off from doing fantasy football, I did a few videos with a few people, including one with the Llama Lounge, and there was a particular segment on that show where basically every week I would just have a big sort of moan about Eddie Howe, because I always used to think that at Bournemouth he was mildly overrated as a manager. I felt that whilst he was decent at coaching an exciting attack, there was just a number of things about his management style that clearly was causing Bournemouth a lot of defensive problems. And whenever he was mentioned in the conversation for the England job, I was like, no, I think I'd like someone who knows how to coach defence better. And of course, we ended up getting someone who only really thinks about defence. But that's for another time. The point is that Eddie Howe is now at a point where, basically, I think that he's gone away and he's learned from his mistakes and is reaping the rewards from learning from those mistakes, because this Newcastle team is playing great football and at both ends of the pitch. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that are a bit frustrated to have lost the Newcastle clean sheet again, but just go look at the numbers. When you look at how few chances and few big chances they're conceding across games, and their XGC over the last few 4 or 5 games is looking pretty good as well. That is a far cry from what we knew of the Newcastle before Eddie Howe. It's also a far cry from Bournemouth under Eddie Howe. And, I think even he himself said that when he had his sort of little sabbatical from football management, didn't he, between Bournemouth and then joining Newcastle, that he went away and did a lot of thinking, did a lot of studying and looking at different ways of coaching and things like that. And I would imagine that one of them has been how to coach defence, because I've been very, very impressed with them. And, that foundation has helped them go on to get to a point where, every week, there's attacking returns from Newcastle players all over the place. And, so they can build from that and really go and confidently performing games. And it's, what a transformation. So in terms of their attack, it's 9 goals in their last 2 games for Newcastle. And, 10 men of Fulham, obviously they blew away. But then they didn't need the sending off against Brentford. Scored, beat them 5-1. So lots of goals going in, and Kieran Trippier obviously is the most exciting one of those. He's now avoided a blank in his last 7 home matches and averages 6.9 points per game in that time. Just what a guy. He for me is now the most essential defender in my opinion. I know I've gone on about Cancelo, but Newcastle will have a game in Gameweek 12, so that just puts him that little bit ahead. But obviously with the price as well, you can't afford to not own him now. You have no excuses, I think, with Trippier, because even when Newcastle concede, he's getting involved in the goals with the set pieces, and he can take free kicks as well. Very advanced player, very experienced player. Historically did all right when he was a Spurs asset as well, so yeah, he's someone worth having. Lee Duxbury says, Eddie Howe took Bournemouth from League One to the Prem. I don't think the defence was his fault. The players just weren't good enough. That's an interesting discussion point. I mean, you could be right. I personally think that the players were good enough when they wanted to be, because there was a time when Bournemouth were top of the table for points won from losing positions, and simultaneously top of the table for points lost from winning positions. So they were really, really good at being 2-0 down and winning 3-2, but they were also really good at being 2-0 up and losing 3-2, which, I mean, maybe that's the quality of the player. Maybe you're absolutely right. But for me, that just goes to show there was quality there that could turn around those sort of situations and beat the likes of United. And because I think quite near the beginning, they went through the big clubs and they got really great results against Chelsea, United, and Arsenal maybe, and just, I don't know. Well, anyway, the point is, Eddie Howe right now is having the time of his life, and I just need to apologise because I really question that appointment, and it's really working out. Other players that have done well, Callum Wilson has now made it 30 attacking returns in 42 starts for Newcastle, which is just, wow, incredible. We've also got Almiron doing particularly well. He is a player that, actually, do you know what? He was someone who used to underperform against his XG, but he's really matching it at the moment. Let's go back to those numbers. That's what I was looking for. It's the same table but blown up a little bit bigger, which is all midfielders across the course of the season for expected goal involvement. And wow, look at this. In 4th place is Miguel Almiron, and he's actually matching those numbers now because his overperformance against his XG at the moment is plus 0.06. So he's scoring the number of goals he should be getting, and 5.1 is just an incredible price, and he's nailed on. I mean, no one's coming in to take his place, is he? So yeah, I mean, if you're on the lookout for a midfield player in that particular price bracket, then he's certainly one worth thinking about. Now, someone who may well be someone you'd previously been thinking about, because he has sort of been taking a lot of the headlines and the plaudits, is Bruno Guimaraes, who obviously got some attacking returns again in Gameweek 10. And he's had some price falls this year, so he's now 5.6, started at 6 million. He looks good too, but I mean, if someone was to ask me which of the two I'd go for, I'd probably, at the moment, still go for Almiron, because there's a couple of things that we probably need to wait for from Guimaraes before we can start to rely on him for regular returns in a way that I particularly enjoy relying on. I like to rely on players getting lots of shots and creating lots of chances in dangerous areas of the pitch, quite close to the goal. Now, the thing about Guimaraes is that he has been, he was employed again as a number 6 against Brentford, which is not a surprise because that's a position we know that he has played and done well for Newcastle. His goal against Brentford was scored from 25 yards out. He's had just 1 shot in the box and 3 penalty area touches all season. So we do have to remind people that his goal threat is limited. Even if he's getting the points. Whereas, however, look, of course, at Almiron with his expected goal involvement is much higher because his chances are coming much closer to the goal. But there could be a time in the season when maybe Guimaraes is going to play further forward and then maybe can start to match Almiron for those underlying numbers. We should keep an eye out for Jonjo Shelvey. He is... He's sort of back in the frame and is the sort of person who can play in a deeper midfield role. So if he's going to play deeper, then maybe Guimaraes can play further forward than being a number 6. We want to really see him in a number 8 role. Last season, he scored 5 goals in that role. So that's what we're waiting for. And the other thing, of course, is that Saint-Maximin is back. So keep an eye on what impact that's going to have. Anyone who's looking at Jacob Murphy at 4.3, another wildcard confession. I had Jacob Murphy in one of my wildcard drafts, and I took him out because of this exact reason. I knew Saint-Maximin would be back, and of course, in typical wildcard fashion, it was Jacob Murphy that scored against Brentford. But yeah, I can't see him playing for too much longer with Saint-Maximin in the wings. One final thing just to warn people on. We did talk about Trippier. I should have said this earlier. There was one quote that came out about Trippier that just made me a little bit nervous, which was that according to Eddie Howe, he just had a bit of fatigue, I think, today. He's come back from England duty where he didn't play, and that 2 weeks can sometimes just knock a player's normal routine and schedule. Touch wood, there's no injury with him, but we're just trying to look after him, really, and get him through these games. So, I appreciate that's a little bit of a sly bomb to drop, like just at the end of us talking about Newcastle players. But it's I would be remiss in my duty if I didn't pass that on. That's something that you might want to just keep an eye on in the days building up into the next game week, especially with him being highly owned, highly effective when he's on the pitch. So keep an eye out for that. I think that's everything I want to tell you on Newcastle. It just seemed like a great place to go for budget options right now. One thing I can tell you is that United, I think, have gone 2-1 up, and it is Ronaldo. And no, I'm not going to make that noise. But, if I'd had a few beers, I might have done. So it's 2-1 to United, assisted by Casemiro, his former Real Madrid colleague. So if you've got Ronaldo, I'd be very surprised if you do. Tell me, because I'd love to hear about why you got Ronaldo. Nuka Atom says, Newcastle don't have any midweeks, and Trippier is their captain. That's a good point. The other thing that makes them... Every year you get a team that just is able to just play at the top of its game in the Premier League because they have no distractions. And what will probably happen, this is my prediction for Newcastle, and it's hopefully not disparaging in any way, they could be one of those teams that just has a great year with no distractions, finishes 5th, gets the Europa League, and then the following season is so distracted by the Europa League they finish 15th. We've seen teams like that quite a lot. And what will happen is that Almiron, Wilson, Trippier will be like 7 million next year, and then we won't want them. But for now, while they're really nicely priced and doing particularly well with no distractions, now's the time to get them. Alex says, what about Willock? Is he a good option? He had a good spell last year, if I remember correctly. He did. He won an incredible run when he was there before. And I should mention him because he is on this list of players who have decent expected goal involvement. Now, De Bruyne, Foden, Salah, Almiron, Gross are the top 5. Willock, of all FPL midfielders, is the 6th highest in all matches so far for expected goal involvement. Although this should just clarify, doesn't include Sunday's data, so it may have tweaked somewhat. But even still, just to be in this particular area at 4.9 at this stage of the season is impressive. So his expected goal involvement is 3.71. He has underachieved against it, minus 1.71. Now, I've not watched enough of Willock in his career to tell you if over the course of it he's a serial overachiever like De Bruyne or a serial underachiever like Nathan Redmond. But from what I saw of him last season, he's clearly a quality player. If you feel like he can can readjust himself back to the norm, i.e. come back in line with his expected goal involvement, well, then he's going to improve, isn't he? Because if he can keep up his XG and he can perform better against it in terms of sticking it away, or his colleagues can perform better in terms of sticking away the chances he creates, maybe he's one to go for. And of course, at 4.9, he's very, very cheap and would be a good differential too. So he's not that far off Almiron for his expected goal involvement. So, if you're looking for a differential and you're looking for a cheap option, Willock is actually not a bad shout. So. Alex says Newcastle have too much money to ever drop to 15th again. That's a good point. They'll probably just buy Mbappe in the summer so that they can win the Europa League. There we go. That's my prediction for Newcastle, which there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that whatsoever. So, before I leave everyone for the evening, I thought I'd just invite people to have the opportunity to ask any questions if they'd like. And whilst I'm waiting for the questions to come in, I'll go back and see what else we've got. Animation says, how long is Trent out for? I don't know yet. What I will say is keep an eye on the Fantasy Football Scout Twitter account. They will have any updates on him. He obviously came off at half-time for Liverpool today and didn't have the best afternoon either. Once again, he was suspect for the goal. I'm led to believe. I didn't see the game, but listened to it on the radio. And a couple of the guys on BBC Radio 5 Live made the point that it's really annoying because for every Liverpool goal now that they concede, your eye immediately just tries to find Trent. Like, where was he? Where was he? I'm going to lambast him. And it feels a bit mean. But apparently today it was kind of obvious that you needed to keep an eye on him because he was at fault for the goal again. So, we'll tell you what, if you're someone who went Trent over Cancelo on a wildcard recently, let us know because that sounds like pain. Nuka Atoms is encouraging me to mention the additional update on Mitrovic. That's a good shout. I should have done that. It seems to suggest that he's still feeling the knock from his leg and wasn't anywhere near match ready for today. Well, that's obviously discouraging for people who've kept him. But, might mean I still think let's just see what we hear in midweek. I love this question. SC1827 says, is free hitting in Gameweek 12 worth it if you have 5 Arsenal and City players? So, that means you're going to have, 10 active players? The thing that's tricky, and this is why I built my wildcards so that I didn't have that many, but then that may obviously punish me, and that maybe I'm no expert because look at my rank, it's on the screen right now. But the thing about having 5 Arsenal and City players is that that actually makes a lot of sense for Game Week 13 onwards, but it does seriously damage you for Game Week 12. Do you really want to sell that contingent for Game Week 13? For Game Week 12, knowing that you're going to want them back again for really nice games from Game Week 13 onwards? No, you don't want to do that either. That said, 10 players in Game Week 12 isn't like necessarily awful, but again, it probably just depends who they are. I'm someone, and this is just my experience, so you don't have to just take it with a pinch of salt. I don't like to use my free hit until much later in the season. In that particular game week, we get it every year, and to be honest, off the top of my head, I can't remember if we have one like it this season, because I know this season is all a bit messed up with the World Cup. But when the FA Cup clashes with the Premier League later in the competition, when you end up down to you're going to have 5-6 players, the free hit is so much more effective in a week when you go from 4, 5, 6 players to a full 11 who are all the best players for that week than you do when you start 10 in a game week like this. I think there's going to be loads and loads of hits. I think my maths may be terrible with this off the top of my head. Yeah, I think it might just be 9 players. But either way, you're not that far off 11 players. I think there's going to be loads of hits in that game week because I think there'll be a lot of people who've used their free hit already, because weirdly there always is. There'll be a lot of people who don't want to use their free hit, so therefore will take some hits. So actually, I think it means that actually by just holding steady and maybe making one transfer and going in with either 9 or 10 players, personally, I don't think is going to set you back that far. And then if you have all those Arsenal City players and you've got them ready to just absolutely smash up Game Week 13 and to 16, I think you're going to reap the rewards there. And then if you can then leverage that free hit against a much better chance to go from X amount of points to X plus 40 points later in the season, I personally think that's going to do your season much, much better. It's all situational, because in terms of those players that you've got, if they're all right for Game Week 12, then go with them. But, if you've got people who have 9 or 10 players and that involves them bringing in Neco Williams and starting him, and a couple of other people on their bench that you just really don't want to bring in, then, in a way it's not strictly about the number, because it's about the quality of players as well. But my view is it's quite situational in terms of the players. But personally, I'd rather hold the chip itself. Eddie Casey says, is it worth getting Anthony in, as he got 3 goals in 3 league games? Bring him in for De Bruyne next game, and when Game Week 13s can swap him back, Anthony to Foden. That's not a bad idea. I mean, he certainly is in decent form, that's for sure. In terms of booking in transfers, I've never really been a huge fan of that, because the best laid plans of mice and men always sort of comes back to haunt fantasy managers, in my opinion. If you plan to bring a guy in who you're going to get rid of, personally, I've just found it sometimes can land you in a bit of a hole if you end up having to use other transfers for other stuff, because you may end up then getting locked out of doing that because you absolutely had to sell someone else because that you just needed to. For example, if you get an injury coming in or whatever. So it's not a bad idea. That can pay off. I mean, I think that it's one of those things that can pay off. But for me, that's a little bit too much risk personally. I just don't like to bring someone in I know I'm going to get rid of. If you're going to bring in someone for Game Week 12, I personally think it should be someone you're happy to hold beyond that point. Because it's all about risk management. But I appreciate it's all down to everyone else's style. Anyone who's ever watched videos or listened to me on any of these will know that I am the most boring FPL manager going. I take hardly any risks at all. I like to go with what I know, and I like to go with the variables I feel like are the most likely to go in my favour. And I just don't trust the universe enough not to throw a huge spanner into the works. If I buy a player in who I know I want to sell, and then 2 of my other players get injured, I'm all of a sudden stuck with that player who I wanted to sell. And that would be what would happen if I do that transfer. My money goes on the fact that if you do that transfer, it will absolutely pay off and it'll be great. Because often fortune favours the brave. I'm not brave, which is why fortune never favours me. Nuka Atom says, with Neco Williams in the team, it will already feel like playing with 10 players. I mean, that is absolutely fair. All of his attacking potential has completely dropped off a cliff as well. SC1827 does say that he is still tempted to free hit. Well, fair play. I mean, it can work out. It can work out, because there will be players who will be managers whose team just aren't lined up for Game Week 12. they'll have 10 players, but they'll be the wrong ones. With the free hit, you can get all the right ones. So it can work. But, that's just my particular opinion, basically. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. I think that people probably want to go and watch the second half of United Everton because it is shaping up into a bit of a decent encounter, it would seem. So, yeah, go on then. Oh, okay. I saw a message come in that I was going to actually allow, but Nuclear Atoms has decided not to show it, where he basically... I think he basically called... Did he call me an idiot? I don't know. It's fine. You can call me an idiot. My wildcard did terrible this week, so, don't listen to me. Listen to everyone else. But speaking of everyone else, before I do go, I will remind people that what you need to do is you need to subscribe to Fantasy Football Scout. You need to hit the bell notification. You need to like this video so that you can make sure that you never miss any other content on this channel. Again, we have some very high profile, very highly skilled managers who do videos on this channel. So you've got Scoutcast on Tuesday. I believe that Flapjack is now on the lineup, and he's one of my good old Reading FC friends, making sure we've got some Royals representation on the panel. So exciting times for him and for you guys to listen to him and watch him on Tuesday. We have team news on, I think it's Friday as well. 2 absolute bastions there of fantasy football coverage. Make sure you don't miss those. They will be on later in the week. Before I go, though, we got one last question from Capsize. It says, would you sell Wilson for Mitrovic this week? Would I sell Wilson? I mean, I don't think so. I don't own Wilson, but what were the stats again? Was it 30 attacking returns in 42 starts for Newcastle? And fixture in Gameweek 12 that's quite tasty. I'd be keeping Wilson. If I owned Mitrovic and I had the money to go to Wilson, I'd probably do that as well. So there we are. We've ended on a Callum Wilson high. But yes, thank you everyone for listening tonight or watching, depending on which way round you decided to consume this content. Really appreciate people sticking around for this, especially through Everton v Man United. I'm very impressed with how many people watched it. I'm flattered. So thank you very much. And hopefully it won't be so long until we stream again and spend this time on a Sunday evening chatting everything through. But until whenever that is, until the next time, I wish you all the greenest of arrows. And I'll see you next time.